Hello, welcome to The Intersect, where DoD, academia, and industry meets. Today I'm joined by my colleague, Brett Tucker. Hello, Brett. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Brett, this afternoon I was hoping we could explore risk management, sort of as broadly as a topic, and then a few specific applications of risk management. So, let me offer you a premise as it relates to cybersecurity, which is all sound cybersecurity decisions must be rooted in sound risk management decisions. So I know that sounds a bit declarative, but thoughts about if what I'm saying is valid and if that's the worldview you have regarding the intersection between cybersecurity and risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly a topic near and dear to my heart. This is the idea of how do we make good decisions to begin with? And how do we handle the uncertainties related to those decisions? There's always these things that can go wrong, the shadows that lurk in the corners, however you want to say it, the unknowns. And there's no difference whether I'm making a risk-based decision in, let's say, just gambling, or if I'm actually doing cybersecurity practice. Now, obviously, that's not gambling, but I am taking chances when I expose my system to external threats, possibly, or maybe even insider threats. So I have to take all of those risks into account, and I have to make decisions upon how I'm going to build out my security stack, maybe, or how I'm going to actually choose to project my organization on the internet. However that goes, I have to consider what those risks are, and I have to take action accordingly.
Thanks, Brett. So one of the risks that's front of mind for just about everyone these days that works in cyber is supply chain risk, and the SolarWinds incident or series of incidents has really reinforced that supply chain risk management is a serious challenge for all organizations. So I'm thinking about the work you've done here at the SCI, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but do you see the SolarWinds incident or breach as being in some ways a failure of risk management, or was it a risk beyond our ability to comprehend?
Well, so that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both, actually. So there's this notion that if I do great risk management, that I will avoid all issues, right? And that's absolutely actually not true. I mean, there's always going to be some bit of residual risk that's left in the system no matter what actions I take. And for not knowing all the details related to SolarWinds, I could say that I'm sure that there are elements there that could never quite be accounted for. There's vulnerabilities that just wouldn't be identified unless absolutely, pick through and then pick through again kind of an idea. So it's not so much the idea that you're thinking about that with a crystal ball for that day ahead that might happen. It demonstrates that risk is also important for thinking down the road. Okay, so I've hired this new contractor. What could potentially go wrong? And how do I insulate myself in a resilient sense for that cold, dark day that might just happen?
So, Brett, can you expound on what you mean by resilience? So, in some communities, that means fault avoidance. I think you're saying something different.
Yes, I am. So this is the notion of having a property of your organization that it's able to overcome disruptions as they happen. And this takes both forethought and it takes this idea of having a good operational sense about you. The forethought is getting ahead, thinking about the impacts, the threats, and how that likelihood could come about that you could realize that impact, and then being ready for that day once it happens. That's the resilience I'm speaking of, operational resilience as we call it.
So in that context, then, if you're needing to contemplate the capabilities that you need in the future, that's going to then require risk analysis. So you're looking at you're looking at the impact, you're looking at the likelihood, and then your pre-positioning capabilities to then address that risk, right? So from my perspective, I see supply chain risk as an extension of rather than a unique set of principles, right? To me, it's an extension of the same concepts of enterprise risk management, operational resilience, and operational risk. And I know that in your time here at the SCI, you've done a great deal to move the needle on enterprise risk management, specifically and most recently with the publication of the latest version of the OCTAVE risk management framework. Now, for those that are watching, they may be familiar with OCTAVE, but Brett, I ask you to do things, if you could please. One is just a general description of OCTAVE, and then explain what's new in OCTAVE FORTE.
So from the very beginning, and we're going back decades, OCTAVE is a set of tools, processes, a philosophy, if you will, for how to manage risk in an enterprise, especially from a cybersecurity organization perspective. And then it evolved. It went through, let's say, OCTAVE Allegro was one of the more recent iterations, but I say more recent, that's even within the past 10 years or more. And that was dealing with information risk. And we've taken it to a next step of evolution. Now, all these processes are complementary, mind you, but what Forte does is it elevates risk management to that next level of the enterprise, and it tries to connect the cyber professional to the executive. So that way, there's not just this discussion of bits and bytes from the cyber professional level, but now a dollars and cents translation for an executive. And we do that using classic enterprise risk management tools. And we also have a nice 10-step process that goes around it so an organization can evolve that culture that's necessary to address risk. And you talk about supply chain risk, I see this as being no different. As we hire organizations, third-party providers to come in, they become a part of our team, intrinsic to achieving our objectives, our strategic objectives for our organization. By default, that means that they are a part of that critical chain, that if a risk were to come to fruition, it would debilitate us just as much as them. So we need to be mindful of the team members that we bring on by vetting them, by understanding the risks that may impact them, because they may in fact impact us.
Thanks, Brett. So OCTAVE has a long history and an extensive user base. So just to be clear, if you're using OCTAVE now, you're using a prior version, you don't have to throw away the OCTAVE you know and love, but rather look to the new OCTAVE as an extension or augmenting OCTAVE. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. So yes, OCTAVE and its predecessors are all very much complementary. So as I was saying, we have a greater construct now with Forte that tells an organization how to build proper policy, procedure, appetite, governance. And within that, they're going to be executing processes to analyze the risk, to brainstorm and understand what responses they want to deliver, how to prioritize those risks. Allegro, for example, would be very much a key part of that for conducting analysis and prioritizing risks. So yes, they all are part and parcel to each other, and other processes as well.
Great, thanks. So let me give you a more specific application of OCTAVE Forte. So let's say I'm a manufacturing organization, and I've studied the solar wind situation. I have concerns about the third parties we're using, specifically in the acquisition of software, the things we're purchasing and deploying on our networks. Can you explain how someone would use OCTAVE Forte in that context? How could you use it to measure and make risk decisions?
Sure. So how about I give you a top-down answer to that, actually? Because I think that it would actually start with governance. Your organization needs to know and understand its needs, especially in terms of achieving its objectives, who it has to hire and what services are we going to procure to achieve them, right? Now that you have that understanding, you have to understand their appetite. So if we're bringing on a certain vendor and we know that they bring a certain exposure with them, through some analysis, we can measure, for example, things like what kind of public events or breaches have they had in the past 5-10 years. I'm just using that as a gross example. You would use that to measure whether or not you have appetite to bring those providers into your organization. At least start the question of, okay, so how are you insulating yourself today? So it starts at the top, thinking about governance and how your leadership communicates to the organization that it has appetite to take those vendors on. And then there's elements of analysis that are going to take place. Now we're getting into the details, right? We're going to get into technical aspects of, like I said, what kind of security stack do they have, assessing quantitatively what kind of impacts could be realized if any of those things should happen to have a fault. And then we start thinking about response. Okay, so we're willing to take this risk on by accepting this vendor. What can we do to mitigate any challenges? Is it training? Is it policy? Is it terms or conditions with respect to the contract? And then you have to track it. You have to make sure that you're not only are measuring it, that somebody's minding the store and making sure that things are going well.
Thanks, Brett. So risk management can seem really daunting, especially for smaller organizations.
Yeah.
And I know it doesn't have to be. You can do this in bite-sized chunks. You can do this in a number of iterations. Can you explain how you get started if you're a smaller an organization, maybe less familiar with some of the terms we're using this afternoon?
Yeah, I think it starts with a base blocking and tackling of understanding that risk is nothing more than uncertainty. it kind of dulls down that big ask of, oh my goodness, I hear that it's a 4-letter word, but it seems like a 1,000-letter topic, right? Like there's something that's just insurmountable. So if you can accept the fact that it's uncertainty and the fact that it's just either a threat or an opportunity, the best thing to do is to make your workplace knowledgeable of what it means to you, right? Everybody, here's what we're trying to accomplish. I want you to just think about on a day-to-day basis, what could inhibit us from accomplishing those things. I'll give you a good example. You mentioned the manufacturer for, just at the base level, you could speak to people on your shop floor and say, think about safety, right? There's uncertainty in the equipment you're operating. You could have a policy mess up, or you could have a procedural step where something goes awry and you're injured. That's an impact. So if you can just relate it in the basic terms that people are already somewhat geared to understanding and just start documenting it and thinking ahead about it, you're going to have a good foundation for a good risk culture.
Thanks, Brett. So cyber is just one of many risks. You mentioned needing to kind of monetize risk so that we're speaking with an equivalency at the executive or the board of directors governance levels.
Yeah.
Can you describe sort of any attributes that make cyber unique? I mean, so certainly cyber is front of mind and first and foremost in our discussions, but I should point out that OCTAVE addresses more than just cyber risk, although I would describe it as being very good at positioning cyber risk in that universe of risk. So thoughts about anything unique to cyber risk and how cyber risk plays with other types of risk?
Yeah, certainly. Let's start with your first question, this idea of what makes cyber so unique or cyber risk so unique. So one is, I think for a lot of the folks who are listening today, they understand that there are a lot of technical aspects that are related here. And just like with SolarWinds, there are a lot of things that even the technical folks have trouble grasping with their own software, with their own equipment at times, things that you just can't think of. That needs a grand bit of expertise to understand. And then you have to turn around and be able to translate that in terms of, well, what's it mean to the organization? Is it going to bring us to a dead stop? Is it going to be a disruption that we may or may not be able to overcome? And then when you turn your hat around, you say, hey, now I got to relate this amongst every other care that other executives have in the organization, whether they're thinking about retention of talent, if they're thinking about procurement, if they're thinking about legal aspects, if they're thinking about ethics, all compliance, all these different things. And by the way, what I'd like to note here, and you've hit upon it, Matt, is the idea that all this stuff is interconnected. Cyber tends to be that silver thread that weaves all these things together, because there's not one of us in an organization professionally that doesn't touch some kind of piece of electronic in a day, like whether it's your computer, whether it's your cell phone or something to that effect. We're all bringing exposure to the organization. And if we can pivot off that interdependency and those risks, we can understand better how to prioritize them and how to spend money such that we're not doing so duplicatively. Like we're not spending additional monies that we've already invested in our security staff.
Thanks, Brett. So I know that we recently issued or released OCTAVE FORTE as an academic work, right, or as a technical report to the community. If folks are interested, they can certainly find that on the SEI website.
Yes.
Other collateral or other sources for information about Forte you point to?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of sources. One is you'll get my contact information, so feel free to reach out to me or CERT as an organization. They'll be sure to put me in touch. We also have some training courses that we've put together. In addition to training courses, we also have facilitated sessions where we can actually sit down with an organization and demonstrate to them how they would apply the principles to their context. So we would actually be able to come in and help them think through how they would implement Forte in their organization or elements of it. We also have some other documents that we're working on in terms of talking about its interplay with risk management framework, how it is going to interplay more with governance and the CISO structure at large. So we have additional documentation that's going to be coming out in the future that's going to help people get a better handle or grasp on what it all means. Because it is going to be more than just this one document. We're talking about an entire ethos that an organization needs to take on to be more effective in their risk management.
Thanks, Brett. So you mentioned other complementary risk management frameworks. So if you're using FAIR currently or using RMF,
Yes.
That doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't use OCTAVE. I just want to make that clear that they complement each other. So
Absolutely.
for those that are watching that are using one of those methodologies, and vice versa, if you're using Octave but have an interest in FAIR, there is a way for these things to work in harmony, correct?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, intentionally so. Because we recognize that all organizations have good elements that they're finding in all these things. And we don't want to throw that out and start over, if you will, right? So, with FAIR, for example, it gives you a great bit of quantitative analysis. That's going to take place deep in the steps of Forte. So I'm trying to give an overall organizational perspective on how they build their risk program. And then they're going to do great things as they implement these other tools in their organization.
Thank you. So, Brett, I know that we're looking for resources. We're looking for folks that have a strong interest and background in risk. Can you describe the profile of the sort of folks that we're looking to recruit here at the SCI when it comes to risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And this may be a grand ask, but I know those folks are out there. Those folks that actually have a security or technology background, and maybe not a deep or an extensive one, but somebody who is actually also has the business acumen to understand how organizations communicate in terms of economics, and maybe even if they have like an MBA or maybe a business undergrad with a strong cyber business experience, let's say, folks like that, or maybe even prior federal government where they've had operational experience with respect to cyber, and now they've pivoted over to the business side of it.
Thanks, Brett. And if folks are interested, it's sounding like soon we'll have postings on the SCI website looking for folks. So the recruitment process is just ramping up now. I have a question for you, Brett, about where you see risk management heading. So we talk about topics like artificial intelligence and quantum and machine learning.
Yeah.
Certainly, from my perspective, all of those come with great promise, but also are the source of risk themselves. Can you speak to how maybe how perennial risk management concerns are and how these new technical topics fit in our thinking about risk?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, AI is a great example. I just wrote a white paper on this not too long ago about how there are risks related to AI, sure. But to be honest with you, it feels like you're kind of ingesting and considering the same risks time and again, regardless of the type of technology you're bringing on board. If you step back and you look at it, every new technology has uncertainty related to how people might exploit it. And it just is a matter of having that culture in your organization, having the tools and processes available. So you have a standardized treatment of these risks related to either new technologies or any new asset, whether it's a facility, a person, technology, information, whatever you're bringing into your organization, they all have similar concerns. Now, true enough, there's subject matter expertise that may be required at the technology side, but as long as you're treating it in a standardized manner, you can have that prioritization or ranking and racking and stacking of the risk to understand how to better commit resources. That is risk-based decision-making in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that's really the goal, isn't it? That you're making, we understand that risk can't be reduced to zero. We understand that cybersecurity can't meet a 100% certainty that you'll have no incidents. So there's always trade-offs, and the quantifications of the impact and the resources required to mitigate the risk is really what we're after. Right? Do we kind of, to reduce it down, that's what risk management essentially is, correct?
Yeah, and actually, so you asked, like, where's the cutting edge of science? Where's it going? And actually, that is where it's at, is trying to understand how to get that end around, how to get to that cold, dark day and back off and understand how you got to that disruption and how to implement certain controls, whether administrative, whether technical or physical or otherwise, and how could you alleviate or keep that risk from happening? And if it does, it's going to take some novel technological solutions and or just people who are operationally savvy to overcome that disruption and keep an organization going in those dark times. So you need people who are savvy both in terms of operating your system, but also the engineers who are thinking about your architecture and how it's all built.
Yeah, so it sounds like 5 years from now or 10 years from now, if we're talking about a completely different technology stack, let's say we have chemical quantum computing, the same basic risk tenets and risk concerns will be there. And there's a certain perpetual need to address these no matter what technical form the risk takes. And I think that's something that's somewhat unique. And I would argue that Similarly, there's base concepts in cybersecurity that have the same features, but at the end of the day, no matter what shape this takes, we will be talking about working through and looking for tools to manage risk in the future, correct?
Absolutely. You'll always have threats. You'll always have vulnerabilities that are in there because let's face it, it's human design and no human is infallible, right? And there's always going to be an uncertainty linked to could it really happen? When would it happen? Those kind of things, yeah. And we're always trying to think, remember at the end of the day, we're always trying to think about how you feel the pain. So, is it a reduction in some kind of revenue? Is it some kind of, operational disruption that we're trying to overcome? Whatever, or maybe let's go to another real crazy point like compliance. If there's a legal aspect in terms of your system and insulating the information inside of it, regardless of what's going on there, that's all speaking back to risk. So you need a standardized process to address it.
Great, thanks. Right, so we're closing in on the end of our time here, unfortunately. So if people are looking for the things you've written and your thoughts on risk, certainly the SEI website. I know you're active on LinkedIn. And recently, I believe you presented at a conference and that will be available to folks as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm speaking at the RSA 365 conference. It's next week. So anyone who's interested, please feel free to go to the RSA website and sign up. It's all virtual. We're going to have lots of great speakers, lots of providers who are going to be wanting to speak to you and show you their new great solutions. So I highly recommend it. I will be speaking specifically about the AI related risks. So that's going to be an exciting topic. Really psyched about it. It sounds like a great event and it's going to be a great ramp up to the RSA conference coming up in the spring.
Great, thanks. So Brett, just one final question for you. If those in the audience are thinking about risk maybe for the first time or getting serious about it, might be a better way to put it. What's the first thing you'd recommend they do to get their heads around risk in their organizations?
It's a great question. I think one in and of itself is to just realize that risk is present in everything that you do, every action that you take. So as long as you have that general awareness, by the way, I can even boil it down to the point of somebody just logging into their computer in a day and going into the internet. That's exposure. Just having employees that are insider threats, people who may not necessarily have the best interest in mind, or maybe they just make mistakes. All those risks, as long as you're aware that they can take place and you're interested in getting to the bottom of some of them, that curiosity alone is almost a great start in and of itself, because that's the bedrock of a culture, a risk culture that you need so that people have that questioning attitude.
What you're describing, if I could put it in my terms, Brett, if I may, is that you're talking about a risk consciousness, right? And
yes.
Understanding that you're awash in risk, that's always going to be the case, and we're forced to make risk-informed decisions about security all the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Well, Brett, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. I want to encourage folks to really take you up on your offer, which is you do want to hear from practitioners in the community. That's how we make our products better. And I want to thank you again for your time in unpacking for us the sort of fundamentals of what risk is and also highlighting potential future opportunities here at the SEI.
Absolutely. Please reach out.
Okay. Thank you, Brett. Take care.